My husband and I got married on February 9th of 2010, and to save us the double whammy to our wallets, we picked a weekend around that time to have a joint Valentine's/anniversary celebration together. These celebrations usually involve a simple staycation-style holiday back when we were both on lower salary bands. But as the years went on and we got our finances in order, we started venturing further afield than just London or the home counties. Then, around Christmas of 2016, I was looking at potential Valentine's destinations when I suddenly found myself falling deep down the cottagecore rabbit hole. Now, back in the mid-2010s, it wasn't quite the same kind of cottagecore aesthetic that emerged on social media during the pandemic. Like, a lot of inspiration came from Japanese mori fashion, which emphasizes muted colors and nude shades like beige, brown, off-white, light green, and earthy red, as well as natural materials like cotton, linen, wool, and leather. But anyway, after seeing a lot of posts outlining mori styles and aesthetics, I suddenly got a bee under my bonnet about staying in a remote country cottage over Valentine's weekend. When my husband agreed, we started looking at a few places and eventually settled on a small, cozy-looking cottage up in North Yorkshire. We booked the place from Friday the 12th to Sunday the 14th, with plans to drive back home on the Monday morning, and by early February, I was beginning to get really excited about the whole thing. Work had been hellish, the weather had been crap, and not one but two of our appliances were on the brink, so I really needed a little getaway by the time Valentine's Day loomed on the horizon. On the day itself, we got the earliest train possible up to York, then took a taxi out to the cottage. It turned out to be everything we could have possibly hoped for. A lot of Airbnb really try and do you over with the angles of pictures and all that, but all the fixtures and fittings were of the utmost quality. Me and my husband had a bath together in the giant tub that had been fitted upstairs, then after wandering into a nearby village, we got some pub food, had a couple of pints, then went back to the cottage to get some sleep. The next morning was just blissful. We had nothing planned, no work commitments to worry about. It was just me, him, and a weekend of coziness to look forward to. I made us some bacon and eggs, then after a long, steamy shower together, we sprawled ourselves on the living room settee and just relaxed. We had our phones switched off. Almost no one knew where we were, and the cottage was basically smack bang in the middle of nowhere, which made it all the more surprising when, at some point in the early afternoon, we heard a knock at the front door. It actually spooked us a little bit at first, hearing 3 piercing bangs out of absolutely nowhere. But regardless, we knew we had to answer it, as it might have been the host trying to get some important info to us. After all, we've had our phones switched off all morning, so up we get, making sure to fasten our dressing gowns nice and tight so we don't give the visitor a surprise peep show. Then we open up the door. Standing in front of us was a man around my dad's age, so mid-50s to early 60s, and behind him up the driveway is a large, plain white van. He gives us a warm and friendly greeting, then tells us that the owners have hired him and his building firm to do a bit of emergency renovation work. That meant that we'd have to vacate the property for around 2 to 3 hours. As you can imagine, me and my husband were very bewildered about the situation. The Airbnb host hadn't mentioned anything about any renovation work, and there certainly didn't seem to be any sort of emergency inside. Everything looked fine. When we suggested that there must have been some kind of mistake, the bloke just shrugged like it wasn't his problem, told us a job's a job, then asked us what time we'd be okay vacating for a couple of hours. My husband rarely gets annoyed at things like that. He's a very patient person, but the idea of paying almost $1,000 to then have our holiday interrupted, I could tell that he was fuming about it. Fuming though he was, my husband asked the builder if he didn't mind waiting a few minutes because he wanted to give the host a call to clear a few things up. Suddenly, the builder's attitude changes completely, and instead of being all polite, he just said, "Oi," in this really aggressive way, stopping my husband in his tracks as he was closing the front door. Then I swear to God, he says, "I tried the easy way. Don't make me do things the hard way." Both me and my husband are like, "You what?" Both pretty offended as how rude he was being. Then as he starts prattling on about us leaving the cottage, my husband shouts something about calling the police before slamming the door in his face. We didn't call the police, not right away anyway. Instead, I grabbed my phone and got onto the host to see if the man's claims were genuine. It took a while to get them to call us back, but when they did, they denied having arranged any kind of building work. We then tried to clarify who the man was and why he'd been so threatening, but the host claimed to have no idea. They asked us to call the police if we didn't feel safe, and if we really didn't want to stay another night, we could leave with a full refund if we'd considered booking another time. The host and his wife were those two pensioners who supplemented their income through the rentals, and they were so sweet about the whole thing. So instead of us turning tail and running at the first sign of trouble, we decided to stay for the duration of our booking and enjoy the holiday we'd worked so hard to afford. Whatever the weird bloke's game was, we were pretty confident that the threat of calling the police would dissuade him from whatever he had in mind, and if it didn't, well, we'd just cross that bridge when we came to it. If we'd have known what was about to happen, if the bloke had given us any clue whatsoever, we'd have been out of there within the hour. But he didn't. When he turned nasty, it was all these cryptic, antagonistic warnings and threats that were only ever going to provoke a defensive response. We had no idea what he had in mind, so we stayed, and a couple of hours later, it all started to go downhill. It's early evening, so about 6 o'clock, and because of the time of year, it's almost completely dark outside. Obviously, we were still quite concerned by the strange bloke's bizarre visit, but after my husband found an old cricket bat in his upstairs cupboard, we felt marginally safer. On top of that, hours had gone by and we'd seen hide nor hair of our unwelcome visitor, so we just crossed our fingers that we'd see no more of him and got on with our romantic weekend getaway. We weren't feeling particularly hungry, and the pub served food until 8, so we decided on a quick dip in the giant bath before beginning the walk into the village. The upstairs layout was such that the bathroom was on the front side of the cottage, with the bedroom at the rear. The bedroom had this cute pair of wooden framed windows that opened outward into the back garden, but the bathroom had only one small circular window that opened just a crack. If you looked out, you could see the cottage's driveway, along with a little bit of the lane outside, so when we were in the bath and we thought that we heard a noise coming from outside, my husband climbed out of the tub and peered through the glass onto the driveway. Like I might have already mentioned, my husband is the most emotive person, definitely the counterweight to me being very fiery, but that's another story. You hardly ever see him angry, and you never see him scared. So when he turned around to me, and I saw this look of blind terror on his face, I knew that we were in a hell of a lot of trouble. "Get out of the bathroom, put some clothes on," was all he said after that, and he ran to the bedroom to do so himself. You can imagine how panicked I am, because he still hadn't told me what he'd seen that had got him so frightened. It was the bloody zombie apocalypse for all I knew, so while I too rushed to put some clothes on, I'm asking him over and over again what's going on. Please just tell me what's happening. "There are people outside. They've got masks on. We need to hide." I knew it was connected to the guy who'd visited us in the early afternoon. I just bloody knew it. I just hadn't the foggiest idea how. I made sure to throw on as many layers as I could, knowing that we'd probably end up running out the back door or something if the blokes outside tried coming through the front. Then bang. What turned out to be a sledgehammer smashed into the front door, and we take that as our cue to get the hell out of there. We ran downstairs, actually saw the damage that was done to the door by whoever was breaking it down, then bolted towards the kitchen, which is where the back doors were. It was very scary, but I remember knowing that whatever the man or men wanted, it involved the cottage, not us. If we just ran off and stayed away for a few hours, everything would be fine, right? Wrong. My husband swung open the back doors after struggling to unlock them, but instead of being greeted by the path to freedom, we were greeted by a man in a balaclava with a massive crowbar-looking thing in his hands. We were trapped. The man with the crowbar thing ordered us back into the house, and he was soon joined by another masked man carrying what looked an awful lot like a big saw. One of them told my husband, "If you do anything stupid, We'll kill your missus." And that kept him fairly quiet. Me, on the other hand, I was just so scared, so I kept saying all sorts of things begging them not to hurt us, that we were sorry, that we'd just leave if they let us go free. All they replied with was, "Shut up, shut your mouth." And then the next thing I know, we're being led into one of the upstairs rooms and made to kneel. I was so scared that they were going to kill us. All that assurance that they were there to rob the house or something just completely went out the window, and in the end, I had to make so much noise that they shoved a pillowcase in my mouth to keep me quiet. The next thing I remember, the intruders made my husband tell them where our phones were, and that gave me more hope that they weren't going to hurt us. They didn't seem like petty thieves, so taking our phones was to ensure us that we wouldn't be able to phone the police once they left, I was thinking. I only really started to calm down and compose myself when I heard some really loud banging from downstairs, and my husband started reminding me that they weren't there for us, that they were just looking for something, and if all the hammering was anything to go by, it was something in the walls. Since we were told to keep completely quiet, we could hear all the smashing and bashing downstairs, and we could hear the guys saying things to each other. You could hear, "Try this one here," and then bang. Someone would smash a sledgehammer into a wall. Then you'd hear others ripping the wood and plaster apart, no doubt looking for something. They did this over and over again until finally, you heard someone downstairs shout, "Got it." I couldn't see what was going on, but you could tell that they'd found what they were looking for because there was this big flurry of activity before the guy guarding us suddenly leaned in and growled something to us. "I don't want to hear an effing peep out of the two of you until we're gone. You try anything, and we'll kill both of you." After that, he was gone, and after a little bit more activity from downstairs, the cottage was silent again. Neither of us moved for what felt like a very long time. Even though it felt like we were in the clear, I couldn't stop shaking. In fact, I think I was shaking harder then than I was when they were tying our hands, blindfolding and gagging us. And that was just all raw fear. What came next was this emotionally exhaustive adrenaline come down. When we finally thought it was safe, my husband somehow wriggled his way out of his bindings, then untied mine as he tried to reassure me. I just burst into tears as he hugged me, having never felt so grateful to be alive in my whole life. It felt like we lived through a nightmare come to life. It was surreal in the extreme, and once we collected ourselves, we began to creep downstairs to survey the damage. The cottage was completely empty apart from us, but we crept downstairs nonetheless, taking it a stare at a time in total silence, terrified that a masked man would suddenly reappear in what remained of the front door frame. Thankfully, no one came back, and as we edged our way into the front room, our jaws dropped at the extent of the damage. They'd taken a sledgehammer, along with a saw and God knows what else, and they'd torn up all the walls in both the front and back rooms of the cottage. It was a total mess, but through all the torn up wallpapers and layers of settled plaster dust, a sort of pattern started to emerge. Most sections of wall bore a few sledgehammer strikes, but only one section was completely torn out. Just like we'd heard them, they'd been probing sections of the wall before they found whatever they were looking for. Then they'd torn out that whole section to retrieve it. We had a good look inside the hole they'd made, but there was no trace of whatever had been hidden there. They'd also smashed the landline phone, so there was no contacting anyone without walking into the nearby village to get some help. So that's what we did. We set up camp in the corner of the local pub, and after hearing what happened to us, the locals were basically lining up to buy us pints and offer their condolences. This was great for me, as I definitely needed something to calm my nerves, but not so much for my husband, who was our designated driver back to London a few hours later. We had some dinner, and they made calls to the police, the Airbnb host, and our loved ones back home, each explaining the situation and what we planned on doing next. After that, we waited around the pub to give a statement to one of the local coppers whose colleagues had driven over to the cottage to cordon off their crime scene. We told him what we knew, swapped contact details, then got started on the drive back to London. We were still very shaken up, and if they hadn't bashed the door down in bloody February, we'd have probably just stayed the final night. So all we were interested in when we got home were hot showers and early nights. But then the following morning, the theories started. Over breakfast, we started to talk about how bad we felt for the owner. Granted, what we went through was extremely grim, but we weren't hurt and they'd stolen nothing but our phones, which were both insured, thankfully. On the other hand, our sweet retiree hosts had their pension investments smashed up, all after sinking thousands into renovating it. But then, what had the masked men taken, and who did it belong to? It was obviously so important and possibly so illegal that they felt the need to tie us up, blindfold us, and deny us any means of contacting the police so they were safe to retrieve it. But after that, all we had was unanswered questions, and increasingly wild ones at that. I'd like to tell you that we found out, or even that we came up with some kind of solid theory, but the God's honest truth is that we're flummoxed, and apparently so are the police. To our knowledge, the owners hadn't reported anything stolen, and even with the security camera footage which showed the group of men arriving, they just didn't have enough to go on to make any arrests. The rest of the story is a bit boring and involves refunds, insurance claims, and a lot of retelling the whole event to friends and relatives. It was horrible, but like I've said, neither of us are particularly traumatized, and we both firmly put it all behind us. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd give my left arm to know what had been hidden in that bloody wall.